I distinctly remember being woken up one morning by my brother, who told me that one of my cousins had died. He started crying, and I heard my mom crying downstairs, and I just didn't feel anything. And I immediately felt just deep shame about it. Like, how heartless am I? But of course it affected me. But my reaction to that was just different than other people's. And as I went through my grief process, my reaction was different than other people's. And that's just a beautiful thing about humanity. And sometimes a hard thing about humanity is that we're so different from each other sometimes. And we respond to things so differently. And that's okay.
What happens after we die? How does prayer actually work? What's heaven like? Or hell, for that matter? On this show, we interviewed Christian ministers from a Swedenborgian denomination to explore the biggest philosophical and religious questions of all time. Join us for some big spiritual questions.
You know, that whole grief question is so important. So the first thing I would just say, if you're watching this, you're in that position, I want to say on behalf of us here, our heart goes out to you. You know, that is really hard. And I don't think we necessarily see it in the moment. I've learned that grief has its own momentum, its own way of moving, and it's going to move you. And there'll be, you know, like good news, bad news. There'll be years from now where again, you'll hear a song on a radio and find yourself crying. You know, Anne Lamott said it famously. She said, you know, you will lose someone you can't live without. And it will feel like breaking a leg. It'll feel that painful. And then she goes on to say, but you will learn to dance again, this time with a limp. I love that quote. Like, that loss never leaves us. It just becomes more integrated into our lives. And it doesn't mean, like, you can't force that at this time. I mean, if you're in an active right in the middle of it, you just can't do that. So, you know, if I was to pull it all together, it would be, you're not going to be able to rush grief. Like, grief is not something we get through. It's something we move forward with. And as we do that, it's just going to take time. And as you move forward with that time, it's just, you know, trust that there will be a time where, again, you're going to smile before you cry. Doesn't mean the tears aren't going to be there, but it means you'll remember more and more of the joy-filled memories versus the actual loss itself.
Grief is scary and hard, and something I think we are inclined to run away from. I think the best advice is we lean into it. We sit with it, spend time with it. The grief is there because of loss, and the feeling of loss is there because of love. The connection that we had with this person, this loved one. That connection meant something. It brought something alive within us, and when they're no longer within our immediate reach, we feel that almost a void. And I think we do our loved ones a disservice, we do ourselves a disservice when we try to just move on, gloss over it, at least right away.
Grief is different for everyone, is one thing I would say. And whenever I'm talking to people who are grieving, there's not one right way to grieve. And so some people will cry a lot, other people won't cry at all. And people can look at each other and think, why am I not like them? Or why are they not like me? And the reality is we grieve in different ways, and that's okay.
I think so much of that is just holding yourself with kindness, because everyone processes differently, right? Any guilt we feel about the way we've processed loss isn't true. And it's okay that I feel that guilt, right? That's part of how I'm processing. But just letting it be what it is and not letting it be more than what it really is, I think is all you can really do as your emotions do what they need to do as you struggle with a really big thing that's happened.
The New Church tells us that there's sort of two halves of comfort. There's a truth part and there's a heart part, or a head part and a heart part. And so I've found that with people who are struggling with grief, there are times when They want the intellectual ideas. They want to think things through, to understand what might be happening for their loved one who's passed away. There are other times when people want to speak on the heart of them. They want to talk to the emotional experience of this thing.
And by the same token, different ideas are comforting to different people. I believe it's true that God has a plan for everyone, and that everything that happens, even if God didn't want it to happen, and I don't believe God wants evil to happen, I believe He allows bad things to happen only if He sees some good that can eventually come out of it. And so for some people, it can be really comforting to think that, God has a bigger plan. But for other people, that's not what you need to hear, right, when you've lost someone. And because you don't want to think about, oh, I should feel fine because God has a bigger plan. And I think in those cases, the things I emphasize are simply, yeah, Jesus is weeping with you. And the shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. And even though it's true that God has a plan, it's also true that we don't see it a lot of the time. And it's okay if we don't see it now, and don't see it next week, and don't see it 10 years from now, and don't see it until after we're on the other side ourselves. So I think both of those things are simultaneously true, that the Lord is there, that He is guiding everything, and we can feel so lost, and it's okay to feel so lost, and it's okay to feel that grief that we feel, because when we love something, we will grieve when we don't have it with us.
I would say something that I have found as a pastor that really helps people as they're getting ready for this, as well as when they're on the other end of an immediate loss, is just to go over with someone, the 11 words to passing well. These were developed by the man who actually started the hospice movement in the United States. Beautiful words, and it's just this simply. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. And I've used those words after people have passed. I've used those words before people have passed, just as a way to have conversation around where forgiveness can show up, where gratitude can show up, where love can show up, and how it has shown up with this person. And I think this is super important. You want to get a board of directors, and I mean that in a light way. You want to get a group of friends who can gather around you, who are going to help you and walk with you on this process. And we want to make sure one of them's the doer. One of them's it's like great at cooking meals. You got to make sure, this is a little silly one. Make sure you have one on the West Coast so you can call them at, midnight and know it's only 9 o'clock for them. You're going to want somebody who's just going to listen. You may even want someone on there whose perspective you hope that they share. But that's what I found. Like, I needed to just gather my friends, and I needed to ask friends for very specific things that they could offer in this process. And that's what was helpful to me.
At really hard times, we can often turn to faith, turn to religion, looking for an escape. And that's not really what it's there for. It's there to bring comfort, but comfort is a way to keep going with the heartache, not a way to get rid of the heartache.
The things that help the most are, for me, believing that there is an afterlife, believing that life doesn't end with death, believing that people continue to be themselves after death as well is really comforting, to know that not only are they still alive, they are still themselves.
They won't be some bodiless spirit. They won't be a different person. They'll be them. They'll be the happiest you've ever seen them. They'll be the most able-bodied you've ever seen them. They'll be joyful in seeing you.
I worry that a lot of, especially Western culture, just doesn't make space for grief. Take a day off of work and then you go back in and try to power your way through and just check things off your list and forget this deep pit that's developed. I don't think that's healthy. I think we need to find ways to better support each other in making space for grief.
We need to be reminded of the reality of death. We need to grapple with our own mortality. That is useful for us as human beings. So someone close to us passing away, or even in a community, is hard, but I think there's a useful thing where we come together. We sort of put aside our email inboxes and our to-do lists and remember the importance of a father loving his children. Yeah, it's scary to think about the fact that we're going to die. And we need to think about that some. There's a woman in town here who's trying to get a local chapter going of a thing called Death Cafe, which is a thing that exists around the world now, where you eat cake and talk about death. It breaks us out of our cycles in a useful way. So that's sort of a meta thought, is that it's uncomfortable, but it's useful for us.
The doctrines for the new church talk about affection. And the way that this concept was taught to me is that it's a willingness to change for something, a willingness to make space in our lives for something. And when we talk about the affection we have for other people, when they're no longer around, it's almost like there's that pull. How can I make space for them when I can't actually reach them? Well, in those moments when we are willing to sit with that pain of their loss, we also, I hope, are finding ways to see how they still live within us, how they stirred us when they were around, the parts of us that they brought out, the kind of smile that only they could make happen. And really, what was that? Can we honor that by moving forward in ways that would make them proud, and in ways that would bring a smile to their face? I think that sometimes we have to lean into that grief. And if we don't, we're really missing out on that expression of love.
So, what do you think? Comment your thoughts below or click on the link in the description to go to our website and contact us directly. If you want to support us, likes, comments, and subscriptions, as you know, are perfect. This show, just so you know, is produced by the General Church of the New Jerusalem, a branch of Swedenborgianism commonly known as the New Church. Our religion holds the Bible sacred and uses the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg to help distill its stories and parables beyond the literal scripture. If you're curious, no pressure, the link's in our description. Or, just watch more videos.